Hey, welcome back. We are continuing with our comparison between Slackware and Ubuntu. And where we left off last episode is we got our virtual machines going, and we got to the point where our installers are ready to go. And so now we're going to see what we need to do for a relatively minimal install of each of these Linux distributions. All right. Okay. Yeah, and this is another thing is whenever it changes video mode, it will kill the VNC viewer. You just have to reconnect. So the Slackware one changed its video mode, so we will there. Now it's a little bit bigger. Okay, that's good. Okay, and then Ubuntu is not going to give you much choice about how to do stuff. It's going to be pretty straightforward. So we're going to pick English as our language. We're going to install Ubuntu server as the option. And now it changed its video mode. So we just need to reconnect to that one. There we go. See, now this one's just a little bit bigger now too, which is nice. Get these situated. All right, and so we're going to pick English as our language, United States. We don't want to have it do a bunch of keyboard detection. We're just going to tell it English because that's really all we're looking at this point here. Okay. And while that's starting its up thing, we'll flip over to the Slackware one. Select keyboard. Again, just pick the default. Slackware login, don't care. Okay, so this is the first point at which you have to do something in the Slackware install. So we'll sit here for a second, and we'll see what happens with the Ubuntu one. It's loading up a bunch of stuff, so kind of a big difference here. I could tell you the first thing we need to do here is we need to do our partitioning under Slackware, and we'll do that with fdisk. With Ubuntu, it's going to take you through more like a, prompt type system for partitioning. So, but I want to see where Ubuntu lands us here. So it did network auto configuration, we noticed. It did a whole bunch of stuff in the background, just kind of trying to figure out the machine's, hardware situation. Okay, so now we've got, we give it a host name. We're to the point where we give it a host name. And we're going to call it Demo Ubuntu, just like how we named our machine, and continue. And let's see where it takes us now. It wants to create a user account. So I'm gonna create MattBot. Okay, so and here's just a little tip here. These automated installs, if you create your actual user in the install, then it's going to give you the first default user ID, or the first UID, and it's going to create a first GID. Well, I actually keep my UID and GIDs the same across all my servers, and so I want to actually manually create my own user after install so that I can make sure it gets the right UID and GID. This gets to be important when you do stuff like NFS, where NFS, I mean, I would hate to do the whole thing where you set up the whole UID GID mapping in your NFS topology. It's so much better to just keep your UIDs and GIDs uniform across servers. That's my opinion anyway. Anyway, so that's why I do this. I'm creating MattBot because it's a throwaway. It's a throwaway login. I'm going to throw it away after I get in here. So, and the username, fine. Okay. Choose a password. I'm just going to pick a quick little password. Continue. Have to type it again. Continue. A password that consists. Yeah, it's a weak password. I'm going to say yes because I'm going to change it later. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm going to say no to encrypt. So it gives you all those options right up front. I mean, we haven't even really done anything installation-wise. It's figuring out everything we want up front. Time zone. Yeah, time zone's right. It figured out the time zone right. So, okay. So it's like we get this whole, Okay, so here we're up to disk partitioning. So we're actually at the same spot in both installations right now. The Slackware install didn't do anything It just took us we're right where we have to set up partitions. Whereas the Ubuntu install did a whole bunch of configuring stuff out. I mean, we're actually on the network already with the Ubuntu install. We're not with the Slackware one. So that's the difference. You know, it's a totally different. They kind of take a totally different approach towards, doing this stuff. Okay, so and the partitioning with Slackware, it's hands-on. It's totally hands-on. You got to know what you're doing. So fdisk -L. Oh, that doesn't look good. I think maybe it's supposed to be a -L. No. You're supposed to be able to list disks, list partition tables. Well, that's kind of interesting. What was it saying here? It's looking at RAM disks. I've never actually seen this before. That's kind of strange. Okay. Well, we know dev VDA is our fdisk disk. Oh, for goodness sake, disk dev VDA. And here, just to remind you, just how we know dev VDA is our device. We specified that right here. And the fact that it's virt.io means it's going to show up as dev VDA, and this is the file on the physical host that we used. So this is what's really determining that it's dev VDA. Again, that's just something you kind of have to know, I guess. So right. So we're going to do that, and we have no partitions. What we're going to do is we're just going to, for this demo purposes, it's 18 gig. We're going to set up a 2 gig swap partition, which means, let's see, partition number 1, first sector, take the default. Second one is going to be plus 16 gig. Okay, and we're going to create a new primary partition 2, first sector, default, blah. Okay. So, and now if I list the partitions, again, I'm flying through this. It's not a tutorial on how to use fdisk. I'm just doing it. I've used fdisk for years and years and years, so I know all these commands. P prints out shows you a list of your partitions. Okay, and I know that I have to switch my 2 gig partition to type 82 for swap. See, now it says Linux swap, and now I need to activate my first partition. So now it's bootable, and so now this disk is ready. Okay, this is what you do in Slackware to partition your disks. You would read, if you don't understand fdisk, or if you've never done this before, you would probably want to be reading the Slack book, which would tell you how to do this. Or at least Googling on the internet or something to figure this out. But this is how it works. Okay, I'm done. I write the partition table. We're ready to start to launch the actual installation in Slackware. Let's do the disks on the Ubuntu side here. So I'm going to do guided use entire disk. I'm just going to do that. Virtual disk 1. It tells us. I mean, it shows us the list of disks. We've got one disk, our virtual disk. I select it, and write changes to disk. Yes. And it's doing its thing. And it's done, and it's already copying data to the disk. Okay, let's see where it lands us, where it stops. Storing language, running live installer console setup. Okay, so it's actually copied some stuff to disk, and now it's going to run the remainder of the installation, I think. It's preparing, we definitely have to notice that the Ubuntu installer does a lot of stuff behind the scenes, figuring stuff out and making a lot of decisions behind the scenes for us. So we haven't really had to do anything except make some very routine selections, including the disk partitioning. It just showed us which disk it could see, and we picked it, and it did it all itself. So whereas with the Slackware, we actually had to kind of know what we were doing. When I think what I've noticed when Ubuntu says that it's configuring Linux image, when it's doing this thing, I think it's actually setting up the grub information. Grub is the bootloader. It's figuring out what it needs to set up for grub to have that Linux kernel as an entry in the boot menu. Now it's configuring Linux firmware. I don't know what that. It's doing whatever it needs to do for firmware. I don't know, but yeah, it seems to me like it already knows a whole ton about what it needs to do, and we haven't done any kind of software selection or anything yet. So I don't, you're getting kind of what you get. I know it will offer us some services to choose from in a minute here. Let's go ahead and do, we would just, in the Slackware side, to proceed, we do the setup. So here we need to add our swap. We know it's all right. We don't need to do a bad block checking on that. So, okay, that's done. Now we're selecting a partition for our root. We know we've only got that one partition. We're going to format it. We're going to leave, let ext4, the default, be our selection, which is a good selection. So it's formatting. Yeah, okay, so now Ubuntu is configure the package manager. Oh, no, we don't have a proxy. So it's really if you had some kind of special proxy to use. So we're doing that. Okay, we've set up our root partition on the Slackware side. Now we're going to pick our installation media, which we have our virtual DVD in. So we're going to select DVD. We're going to let it scan for it. It's going to find the installation media, which it found it. And the Ubuntu one is still... Okay, Ubuntu is getting ready to let us select software to install. And now in the Slackware, we are at the software selection install. And we will pick up from here in our next episode. So stay tuned. Thanks.